Can I just say one thing firstly? I love the name Eat Sleep Boxing Repeat.
Welcome back to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted as always to be joined by Elliot and Danny. This is the big fight breakdown for the big heavyweight fight taking place on October the 25th at the O2 in London. Joseph Parker and Fabio Wardley go up against each other in a fight that a lot of people didn't expect to see at the beginning of this year, but a fight where, yeah, there's should be a big title fight there for the winner. Gents, good to be joined by both of you. Looking forward to this one. There's some positive things to talk about. I think there's some negative things to talk about potentially, but we'll see what both of you have to say. Danny, I'll go to you first. Is the winner of this fight actually going to fight Usyk? We're not sure what the heavyweight landscape looks like. Usyk obviously last fought Daniel Dubois in July. We don't know if he's definitely going to fight again, how many fights he's going to have, what he really wants to do. But the winner of this fight, it sounds like they will fight for a world title, but we don't know whether it will be against Alexander Usyk or not. What are your thoughts?
I'm not so sure. Of course, on the face of it, you would look at the fact both of these fighters are interim world champions, Parker with the WBO, Wardley with the WBA, and you would think, it's inevitable they would fight Alexander Usyk. However, there is a seeming reluctance on Usyk's side and Team Usyk to make this Joseph Parker fight. I don't think that's necessarily because he's scared of Joseph Parker. You look at the names Usyk's beat at heavyweight, without disrespect, Joseph Parker would probably go in as a bigger underdog than any of those. I think it's just the scale of the fights Usyk's been in, particularly those two Fury fights, the Dubois fight. Okay, maybe not as big, but it was a headliner at Wembley Stadium. It was a massive fight in its own right. A Joseph Parker fight, does that get the juices flowing in the same way? Same thing if Fabio Wardley was to win. I would argue maybe not. I think Alexander Usyk probably hasn't even decided if he is going to continue boxing. And, I'm not saying I want to see this, but he's always kept the door open to trilogies with Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. So I think he's maybe holding out for a fight of that scale. Maybe if Moses Itauma continues with his momentum, that fight will become something closer to the AJ and Fury fights. But if you're putting a gun to my head now, I don't think the winner of this fight will end up getting a fight with Alexander Usyk, which is a shame, particularly if it's Joseph Parker. I mean, it's been said to death, but it is true. He more than deserves his shot. Will come on to the run he's been on over the last couple of years. It's as good as anyone has in the heavyweight division, but I don't see him, if he does come through, Fabio Wardley, getting a fight with Alexander Usyk now.
No, we'll see, and I think that's a fair. Look, these have been mega paydays, haven't they? Especially those two Fury fights that you mentioned. And look, we were there, weren't we, for that fight at Wembley Stadium a couple of months ago, and it didn't. I got the impression Usyk will fight again. He's just not necessarily in a rush. He's just maybe going to see how things pan out around him. If he needs to vacate a belt or two, then fair enough. Elliot, what are your thoughts? Maybe if Joseph Parker or Fabio Wardley win, no disrespect intended, that could be kind of seen as an easier touch for Usyk. If Usyk wants to have one more fight as undisputed champion, and to bow out that way in a fight he's quite likely to win, he could go down that route. But what do you think is going to happen with the winner of this one?
Yeah, I can't actually add too much from the sort of eloquent answer that Danny gave. I totally agree with him, actually. I don't think, well, actually, no, I'll theme it a little bit. I don't think Joe Parker will fight Usyk at any point. I just feel like there doesn't seem to be much appetite for that fight amongst sort of fans or amongst the kind of, it's really a hierarchy. I think that's not necessarily a fight that interested in putting on, even though obviously Parker does deserve it. But I just feel like with the sort of style he has, it's not going to be as exciting as seeing someone like Usyk in with like a puncher or someone bigger than him. I think it's just kind of a foregone conclusion that he'll either kind of stop Parker or outpoint him. I don't think anyone would give Parker too much of a chance in that one. I think Danny was right in saying he'd arguably be, one of the biggest sort of outsiders of all the opponents that Usyk's fought at heavyweight. In a weird kind of way, I kind of see that if Wardley kind of stop Joe Parker, in convincing fashion. I almost feel like that'd be an easier fight to kind of make and sell, because you then go, well, what if he catches Usyk kind of narrative? What if he kind of finishes him, yada yada, that sort of thing. So I can maybe see a world where if Usyk does kind of carry on fighting and maybe wants to kind of, waiting for like that, those massive events that Danny was mentioning there, sort of Joshua or a Fury, maybe there's a kind of world in where he has a kind of tune up against someone like Wardley. I could see that happening, to be honest with you, but I can't see him fighting Parker, just because I don't see there's any kind of motivation, the people that are going to make these fights happen to sort of get over the line. To be honest with you, I think we've heard a lot about Moses Talma. People seem to want that fight really. That's the sort of style I think they want in with Usyk or someone like a Fury or someone like a Joshua, like Danny says, it can kind of give the size and scale of the event that he's been in recently.
Yeah, we shall see. Moses Talma due to fight December 13th against a TBC opponent, so he could come into the frame as well. Elliot, I'll stick with you. I want to touch on Joseph Parker because last 2 years of his career have been a big couple of years, and he's faced some of the biggest names in the heavyweight division. He's put himself in a long-awaited but good position to potentially fight for a world title in 2026. But how would you sum up the last 2 years of his career? Fought Simon Keane in Riyadh, which was a fight he was expected to win, did so. Fought Deontay Wilder in a fight. Deontay Wilder looked like he didn't really want to be there. It was quite a strange fight, but arguably won every round. Beat Zhilei Zhang on points. Got dropped twice, but still won on points. And then had that kind of strange outing against Marcin Bakole when he was supposed to be fighting Daniel Dubois. How would you sum up the last 2 years of Joseph Parker's career?
Yeah, I think it's a harsh one in many respects. I'm not a fan of kind of doing the thing of, picking a sort of a victory that seemed legitimate and decent at the time, and then kind of rubbishing it in a way. Although having said that, I probably am going to do that a little bit with this answer. I think you've got to kind of take away, Simon Keane, I think, from the sort of last 2 years. I think the Bakole one, it was no fault of Joe Parker's, but you have to kind of discount that. I think he jabbed Bakole a couple of times, the towel came in, so you can't really say anything on that really. Would have been a great victory if Bakole was actually fit, had actually been training, rather than sort of dicking around in the Congo wherever he was. That would have been a legit victory. So get rid of that one. I think the Wilder victory at the time that was a very dangerous fight. We didn't necessarily know what Wilder had left. And there a lot of people, there was a sort of block of fight fans, myself included, that thought as soon as Wilder kind of touched Parker, he'd have enough to touch him and get him out of there, even though he might concede a few rounds. Other people did bravely predict the Parker victory, which did come in. So I think at that point you look at that victory and go, actually, fair play to him. Like, it looked like that was a really good victory. The Zhang one, obviously Zhang, is a sort of aging heavyweight, but carried a lot of power. So again, a dangerous opponent. Like you said, was dropped twice and still had this, the sort of resilience to get up and kind of get it done on point. So I think he deserves credit for that. Deserves credit for the sort of style and the kind of names that he's defeated in the Wilder and Zhang. But I mean, it's hard to say that it's been impressive in that respect, but I think there's an element of kind of overblowing it as well. And I think, like the Wilder victory hasn't obviously aged that well. We saw what happened when Wilder fought Zhang. And, it seems like people are desperate to sort of feed the sort of goat to the T-Rex that was kind of Wilder and get him kind of back and get him kind of involved in some fights. Whether we get that or not, we don't know. But I think really you look at that and the only kind of the pressure would have been on that Wilder fight, but really the only kind of big victory in hindsight is probably Zhang. Which is not Joe Parker's fault, but it just is the way it's unshaken.
Yeah, it's a strange. I think as the saying goes, you can only beat what's in front of you, and Joseph Parker's done that, so you can't really ask for too much more. But I think some of the victories are possibly questionable. Danny, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think that what's on Joseph Parker's resume is better than it actually is in the last couple of years? But what are your thoughts on the last couple of years of his career?
Yeah, there's a lot of validity in what Elliot said. I've said similar things privately a few times. You have to say that, as you say, those are three fantastic names at their best, but has any of those three been close to their best, be that in terms of where they are in their careers or the condition they were in on that night? You would have to say no. However, to give Parker some credit, people did think he was, if not done, close to done after that Joe Joyce fight. He took an absolute beating that night, got stopped. There were people, will not name names, calling for him to retire after that. So he certainly managed to silence those critics. And I do think, even though maybe the names on his resume over the past couple of years flatter him, he has improved. He looks to me a better fighter than the Joseph Parker that fought Dillian White and Anthony Joshua. However, I think Fabio Wardley will pose, in a sense, a more difficult test than some of those names, purely because he'll have a lot more ambition than I think any of those three did on that night. Even Zhang, who you would look at and say, well, why you question his ambition? I'm a big Zhilei Zhang fan, but I think his heart does leave a bit to be desired. His aptitude, his discipline. He was even by his standards, in pretty poor condition that night, and then went on to spew it really against Ajit Kabayel. So there's no danger of Fabio Wardley doing that. He'll be trying to win that fight for as long as he's in there. So I think we'll really see what version of Joe Parker it is. I do think there have been improvements, definitely, as I say, but how much so, and if it has been really blown out of proportion, we'll find out against Fabio Wardley for sure.
Yeah, and he's an interesting fighter, Joseph Park, partly because of kind of the amount of weight he's put on. Obviously put on 20 pounds between the Zhilei Zhang fight and the Martin Bakole fight. We'll see what sort of size he comes in, but he's broadened out so much the heavyweight as he's gotten into his 30s. So he's had he's had such a great career, and he's had a long career as well, and he's still not even that old. I mean, you got to remember the Joshua fights, the Principality Stadium, the Dylan White fights. Those fights were a long time ago. So I admire his longevity. Danny, I'll stick with you, and this is kind of the bit of the video that I'm really want to get your guys' opinions on, your views, because it affects boxing fans rather than kind of the fighters of boxing media. But there's been some controversy about this fight being a pay-per-view fight, and on top of that being £25 rather than, I think, £20 is kind of the standard price a lot of the time. £20 was the amount that people paid to watch Chris Eubank versus Conor Benoit. Some people paid that, some people listened to it on the radio. But what's your view on that, on the £25 pay-per-view situation?
Got to be careful what I say here because I'm going to be working there that week. Hopefully, it shouldn't be pay-per-view, really. You look at Joseph Parker has fought on pay-per-views in the UK before, very much as the B-side against, at that time, established pay-per-view attractions in Anthony Joshua and Dylan White. Fabio Wardley, yes, riding the crest of the wave, coming off headlining a stadium show in his hometown. However, I don't see a world in which this is on pay-per-view, especially when you factor in it's also behind a paywall on DAZN. If you didn't have DAZN and you wanted to sign up for this, you're paying what, the guts of 40 quid, and then some more if they tie you into a longer term deal, which does often look to be the case. I think I can't see it performing particularly well on pay-per-view, to be honest. I mean, speculating on buys is difficult, but it's not good because this is a fight that we always harp on about the Sky days. I think we start to sound like bitter old men, but this would perform extremely well if it was on your standard Saturday night Sky show after the football. I don't think there's going to be too many eyeballs on this. I could be wrong. And sort of other point, we're going to touch on the recently announced clash with the Fabio Wardley Jeamie TKV fight on BBC. That'll take away even more of the viewership. I think it's going to massively outperform it. I know Frank Warren's been very upset that Ben Shalom's decided to go on the same day, which I think is telling. I think they know in their heart of hearts that this probably doesn't belong on pay-per-view. Obviously, never going to go out and say it, and I think that's with good reason.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a few things there. I just think one thing I want to touch upon is that it's £19.99 for a monthly flexible pass on DAZN, and obviously this is £25. So if you are, if you're a casual boxing fan but you would quite like to watch this fight, that's £45, and you can watch Dave Allen versus Arslan Bekmambetov, which is before this fight. Other kind of bits, Joshua Buatsi versus Zach Park, which is the week after, which might not appeal to a lot of people. But yeah, it's a lot. But we're not going to make it too much about DAZN and pay-per-views. But I did want to touch upon it. It'll be interesting to see what the landscape's like on the night. It has been confirmed that the fights aren't going to clash. Jeamie TKV versus Frazer Clarke will be. I think the ring walks are going to be at 9 o'clock, I believe. However, whether a lot of people are going to want to watch that and then watch another boxing match, I think is a different topic. Elliot, what does the 25th of October look like in the Greek household for you? Will you be watching Frazer Clarke versus Jeamie TKV on BBC and then purchasing the pay-per-view? Will you not be watching any boxing at all? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, I need to check the BBC Sound sort of schedule, see what they're broadcasting on the radio that night before I really give a sort of a dedicated answer to that question. But I'll tell you what I won't be doing. I definitely won't be paying £25 to watch this fight. I think if you look at it from you've got to ask sort of casual viewers. You talk about catching casual audience there, and you look at if I asked, a spot poll of most people, I suppose I would class as casual fight fans, they would have heard of Joseph Parker. Some, maybe not all, would have heard of Fabio Wardley, but I think any of those guys in the undercard, to be honest with you, they will have no clue who they are. So you're sitting there going, realistically, if this was a kind of co-main event and you had like another large fight on the card, maybe it was like co-main, rather than something like Beterbiev Bivol or whatever it would be, like another big fight, you could go actually justify it and go, that's a good co-main, that's another main, maybe the 25 pound or the additional would be kind of worth it. But I think just you're essentially, for me, as I see it, paying 25 quid or paying the 40 quid essentially for this main event. Like the undercard would be kind of okay if you're kind of a boxing fan, but you're not going to watch that if you're a casual audience, casual sort of enthusiast, as it were. I think, and like you mentioned there, obviously the BBC broadcast, you want to watch that. I probably will watch that. And then are you then going to want to purchase this? No, you probably just hang around, watch match of the day, whatever's coming on sort of after it, and just follow the sort of sport that way. I think you get enough out of it doing that. So yeah, I'd be surprised if it performs that well, to be honest with you, on pay-per-view. But then you kind of get this thing now where if someone's fought on pay-per-view, they kind of see themselves as a pay-per-view fighter, and then that's kind of how it kind of stays, and it shouldn't necessarily be that way. Danny's exactly correcting what he says about Joseph Parker being on pay-per-view but not headlining the pay-per-views, not necessarily being the main draw on the pay-per-views. So it shouldn't necessarily be that way. And I think Fabio Wardley is a bit premature to have him as a kind of pay-per-view fighter as well. So really this one is one that, I imagine people have sat around a boardroom and gone like, what sort of figures we can look at, tick yes or no sort of thing. Probably should have swung no, but they got it over the line into yes. So yeah, but that's what it would look like for me. It would look like watching on BBC, potentially listening on BBC, and then maybe watching match day on BBC. So I'll be BBC, till I die on the Saturday, the 25th of October.
Fantastic. A great evening for the BBC. I'll just add what I think, gents. I think DAZN, Queensbury they've got this one wrong. Like everyone makes mistakes, but when it comes to the people making decisions about what's on pay-per-view, what's not, how much things would be, they've got this one wrong. And for me, I don't think it's horrific that it's on pay-per-view. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it should be, but it's not. I think we've seen worse fights on pay-per-view. For me, it's the fact that for some reason they've upgraded this from 20 to 25 pounds. That's what I don't understand. This is not a Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk, or a Tyson Fury or a Alexander Usyk versus Anthony Joshua. It's not that level of fight. We'll see how full the O2 as well. We'll see if this sells out. We don't know the answer to that yet, but that's one thing that I'm quite confused about. But yeah, see how pay-per-view sales go and see how many seats are filled at the O2 on October 25th. All right, chaps. Keen to get some predictions before we finish things. Elliot, I will let you go first. Break it down for us. What's going to happen? Joseph Parker, Fabio Wardley. Who's going to win and how?
You know what? It's purely sort of personal intuition of mine, rather than maybe necessarily being able to back it up with facts. But I've actually got a feeling that Fabio Wardley's going to win this. I think I can see him conceding pretty much every round until the point where he does, but I think he actually going to stop Joseph Parker. So I almost see this fight for Joseph Parker as being like the kind of Joe Joyce versus Zhang, in the sense you're sitting there going, everyone like Joe Parker, eyes on Usyk sort of thing, like literally so close to the sort of prize, and then just kind of having something like this ruin it. So yeah, I think it's going to be a kind of 8 to 10 stoppage for Fabio Wardley.
Brilliant.
Having given up a lot of rounds. I maybe even see Fabio Wardley going over himself, to be honest, but I can just see him getting through this by KO victory.
Yeah, look, Fabio Wardley a 4-1 outside for this fight. But yeah, I think you can't rule him out, can you? After how his last fight finished, when he lost nearly every round against Justice Hooney and then stopped him in the 10th round, you can't rule him out. Danny, what's your prediction for this fight?
Yeah, this is a fight, of course, with a lot of jeopardy for Joseph Parker, as Elliot alludes to so many times. It's the one before the big one where we see fighters fall short. And the one aspect I think Joseph Parker maybe has not regressed in, but it can't be at his absolute best, is his punch resistance. We saw him down twice against Zhang with cuffing shots, as alluded to earlier. The Joe Joyce fight took a lot of punishment there. However, I am going to go with him to win the fight via late stoppage. I was at Fabio Wardley's fight with Justice Hooney, and he was not in that fight up until landing that right hand very late on. And there was a few murmurs ringside in the round or two before that the corner maybe wanted to have a think about stopping it. And I think it was only for Justice Hooney lack of punch power that Fabio Wardley didn't get stopped that night. Joseph Parker, to me, punches a lot harder than Justice Hooney and is probably every bit as good a boxer, a more experienced boxer, been down the stretch a lot more times. Fabio Wardley as well, 2 out of his last 3 fights, he's taken a lot of flack as well. The first Frazer Clarke fight, of course, and then the 9 and a bit rounds or whatever it was against Justice Hooney. And I think it'll be an accumulation of shots. I think maybe it will be a corner retirement. Because Fabio Wardley, as I say, is tough in game as anything. As tough a game fighter as there is in the heavyweight division. But I think this is maybe too much too soon, particularly off the back of what happened against Hune. So I'm going to go Parker via late stoppage.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point here. I remember like a lot of people, including myself, after the Justice Huni fight, said Frank Warren would make sure Fabio Wardley had maybe a lighter, softer touch in his next fight after having another war against Justice Huni, and that's not happened. And maybe it's not happened because this opportunity's presented itself and it's seen as a winnable fight. I think it's quite a quick turnaround, isn't it? It was June 7th, I think it was, that Justice Huni fight. Then October 25th going up against another top contender in the division. You can't rule Fabio Wardley out. However, if I had to make a prediction, I'm going to go Joseph Parker on a close points decision. I think this is actually going to be a really entertaining fight, which is a shame because I'm not sure that many people are going to be watching it. But I'm really looking forward. I'm really looking forward to this. But yeah, I'll go Joseph Parker on a close points decision. So three different sort of predictions there. We'll see who's right. We'll see. So yeah, possibly Fabio Wardley will win on points, and then none of us will really be right. Well, Elliot will be closest to being right, but we will see. Danny, Elliot, thank you very much for joining me. I will speak to you again soon.
Cheers, lads.
Thank you very much, mate. As always, guys, thanks for watching.